You know, speaking of scaring big government activists on Halloween, I've got another thing that might scare them tonight. Somebody running around dressed as President Ron Paul. That ought to scare any big government activist. Joining us now is the congressman from Texas and presidential candidate who is busy surrounding the state of Iowa before January 3rd. He's opening offices in surrounding states, so one of those is Minnesota. Congressman Ron Paul joins us now. Congressman, welcome to the Jason Lewis Show.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
You are opening offices in the Gopher State, but you're probably circling the Hawkeye State, I imagine.
Yeah, we're doing our best to be every place we need to be, and I'm very pleased that the support has come in financially as well as volunteers to be able to do that. So we're doing quite well as far as I'm concerned.
You'll be in St. Cloud on Saturday for the big opening of the Minnesota festivities. And, of course, in and out of Iowa between now and January 3rd. Some good news for you. In the latest poll, the Des Moines Register poll has Kane and Romney at the top, but the only other candidate in double digits, Ron Paul at 12%.
Yeah, I'm pleased with that. Of course, it'd be nicer to be a little bit higher, but the one thing is we don't have to worry about the dips. You know, some of the candidates come and they surge to the top, and then suddenly they fade back. So I think we're pretty secure where we are, and I think the growth will continue.
What do you make of the notion that in Iowa you need a ground game? You need an organization. You don't just need to perform well or have a very energized base nationally. You need people on the ground, and you need to have some inroads. Does the Paul campaign have that in Iowa?
Yes, better than ever before, and especially compared to 4 years ago. And, the coming in almost winning at the Ames Stroma was a good starter for us because that meant we had located a lot of strong supporters, and they became the ground campaign, for what we're building now. The things have been going quite well there.
Let me ask you a couple of questions. You said over the weekend, I hear, that you're not going to run as a third party or an independent candidate if you do not get the GOP nomination. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I don't know. I don't even think about that. I'm not contemplating that anyway.
Well,
whatsoever.
I happen to agree with your particular foreign policy stand. I happen to believe that Taft and Reagan and really the true conservatism going back decades was one of a neutral foreign policy and avoiding these foreign entanglements and misadventures and all of that. And we're not going to get rid of terrorism until we get out of people's faces. I concur with all of that. I've been saying so. But the fact of the matter is, Congressman, does the rest of the Republican Party agree with that? And how do you get the nomination without getting over that hurdle?
Well, there's no doubt that we have to deal with that. But one thing is things are a lot better now than they had been. Right now, if you look at the entire population of the country, 66% are saying we need to get out of Afghanistan right away. Right. So we're making progress on that. And I think maybe the conversion to our position won't be so much on principle as just practicalities. I've always argued over the years that I'd win the argument if for budgetary reasons, if nothing else, because most people are starting to realize, we just can't do this. And even those who disagree realize, and when I do talk with on the campaign trail and mention that we ought to be spending that money here at home instead of overseas, that gets a pretty loud applause.
Well, there's no question if you were running in the general election, I think the GOP is missing a golden opportunity to turn the tables on the Democrats who were so anti-war during the Bush years and all of a sudden had an epiphany when one of their own Democratic presidents, a la Woodrow Wilson-esque, is leading the interventionist charge. So I think it's a good idea, but I also think it's the right thing to do. But I still don't think the neoconservatives within the GOP are coming on board anytime soon. And that could be a bridge that's pretty far.
I think you're right, but it is the challenge, and that's why we're on TV with ads trying to change people's mind, and there's a fertile field out there for changing people's mind. But the big test will be in January, there's no doubt. So we'll keep plugging along, and it's easy to keep plugging along if you're very confident that's the right thing to do.
Well, you're certainly getting more support, as over the weekend 13 troops were killed yet in Kabul, and you've got a propped-up government there that can't control the outskirts of the capital city, let alone the rest of the country. It really is What would you say to this, going back a number of years, however? After 9/11, something had to be done. You supported routing the Taliban in 2001, 2002, as most of us did. But what's wrong after that, saying, all right, look, we routed you. Here's the deal, however. Because there was a great division within the Taliban as to whether to allow al-Qaeda in, that means there was support on keeping them out. We'll cut a deal. You can do what you want. It's your country. But don't ever let them in again, and cut a deal years ago with the Taliban.
Yeah, and actually, we did less of that. We did less of pursuing the al-Qaeda. Then we went into nation building, and they used the whole mess as an excuse to do things they had wanted to do all along. The neocons had always wanted to go in there and go after Saddam Hussein. So they misplaced their efforts, and really, it was the authority was more directed at al-Qaeda, those directly responsible for 9/11. Indirectly, obviously, Taliban had something to do with it. But the Taliban has never been dedicated to coming over here and killing us. And the reason there was more tolerance there is somewhat like, their traditions and all. But, the real training, if we were dealing with the direct people that were involved, 15 of them were Saudis. There was more justification probably going into Saudi Arabia than it was, into Iraq or even going into nation building in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
Some of that training with al-Qaeda occurred in Germany and Spain, and then they learned how to fly airplanes in Florida. So they misdirected their efforts. I think they took advantage of it, and they pursued a foreign policy that was completely detrimental to us.
Well, I will tell you this. There's a reason that Afghanistan has been called the graveyard of empires for all these years, and the Soviet Union found out, and I concur with you 100% on that particular issue. And I do think you're ahead of the time, and I think the people are going to come around, but there's a lot of blood and treasure being spent in the meantime. Let's talk a little bit about domestic policy, and that is talking with Congressman Ron Paul, presidential candidate from Texas. You also told the Manchester Union leader last week that, and you've been harping against the Federal Reserve for quite some time, and there's no question that what happened in housing was a classic Austrian bubble where you had too many dollars bidding up an asset, and once the banks extended the debt and they got nervous over the bad debt, once the prices got so high nobody could afford them, the whole thing burst. And now the goal of the Obama administration has been to reflate the bubble. We need to let the market clear and the housing to hit prices. I couldn't agree with you more. But laying this all on the Fed is a little bit, not misleading, but it misses the boat. And I want to get your reaction to this. It doesn't miss the boat, really, but I think the fiscal side needs some scrutiny. That is, think about this. If you've got an easy monetary policy, that's clearly far too easy. If the Fed triples its balance sheet, which it has, it's doing so traditionally by buying government debt. If we weren't running deficits, if the federal government weren't floating bonds year in, year out, how would the Fed expand the monetary base?
They could do what they just did. They bought, mortgage debt.
True.
So they have too much leeway. But I think the connection is very important. But my argument is just a little bit different. If the Fed wasn't there to buy the debt through the lender of last resort government, then the government couldn't spend, they couldn't run up the debt because interest rates would go up. So
all right, hold that thought, Congressman Ron Paul. We got to take a quick break. Okay, Congressman Ron Paul, kind enough to stick around for one last question, or actually a continuation of the previous question. Then we got to let him go. But Congressman, we were talking about the link, the nexus between fiscal policy and monetary policy, and the mortgage purchases were extraordinary, and that is why we've got nascent inflation already. But traditionally, they bought T-bills, they bought special Treasury bonds to expand the money supply. Well, these deficits were running, which is a fiscal phenomenon. We're allowing them to monetize the debt. You run no deficit, and unless the Fed engages in an extraordinary act, which is quite transparent, how do they monetize the debt?
Yeah, I think they feed on themselves. My argument was, of course, that if they couldn't buy the debt, the Congress would have to stop because interest rates would go real high. But the Fed uses your argument all the time, and there's a legitimacy to the argument that is that it's a congressional problem.
Mm-hmm.
The Fed feels obligated. That's what they're set up to be, the lender of last resort. So they said if Congress were going to run up the debt, they wouldn't have to do it. And there is some truth to that. But I think the whole system is bad. The Congress is irresponsible. The Fed is irresponsible. But even in the original Federal Reserve Act of 1913, they were given permission to buy private securities. They never did it, essentially. They maybe did a little bit in the Depression. They obviously did it here, in 08 and
Right.
09. But just the principle of monetizing anybody's debt, I think it's, economically wrong and morally wrong as well.
The last question for Congressman Ron Paul. Going to a gold standard, some say, certainly monetarists would say, would be problematic. If you take a look at the price of gold, it went from 300 in 2001 to 2000, or not quite 2000, at its peak here. That'd be a whole lot of dollars turned in. That'd be a whole lot of deflation if indeed gold was moving in that direction and people in a traditional gold standard were turning in their currency. That would certainly gyrate the markets and certainly, what some say, would bring about a massive spiraling deflation.
Yeah. No, when the British went back on the gold standard, there was deflation because they went back at the old standard and the old ratio. Now, if we went back to the gold standard at $35 an ounce or $500 an ounce, that would be deflationary. But if you let the market set it, it might be $5,000 an ounce. There's a good example of how that might work if you look at what they did after the Civil War. They went where gold was a couple $100 an ounce. They withdrew greenbacks. They quit printing them, and the gold price went down.
No, you can't. Right.
And,
you can't go back at the $35 an ounce. I'm just saying in 2001, had it been $300 an ounce, the current price of gold, and gold skyrockets, people are going to turn in a whole lot of dollars, and you could have deflation.
Well, I think the main thing is get some stability where they neither turn them in or take them out. They want to just be confident that they have a measuring rod.
Well,
and so people worry about whether there's enough gold or not. The only way you have deflation is if you try to price the dollar ratio to gold lower than the market should be. But if you let the market set it, they should go in neither direction because there should be the assurance that the currency is backed by something, and people don't even think about it. So you want stability rather than saying.
Well, you certainly have to take the discretion out of the hands of the central bankers, and you begrudgingly praised Paul Volcker in one debate, and he was the last guy that had the courage to really wring inflation out of the economy. And now the perversity of it all is on the fiscal and monetary side, we just keep trying to reflate the bubble. And as you've pointed out, we're in a debt crisis. Adding more debt and more fiat money is only going to make the next downdraft, the next recession, that much worse. I don't know why these people can't see this.
Yeah, you'd wonder. We got into this by spending debt, printing money, and over-regulating, so they're trying to get out the same way. It doesn't make any sense at all,
Right. And, all right, Congressman, I appreciate your time today. You've been more than generous. Have a good event in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and across the country in Iowa, and good luck on the trail.
Thanks a lot.
You bet. Congressman Ron Paul on the Jason Lewis Show. Now we can talk a little bit about that. He's doing quite well in Iowa, has our Herman Cain and Mitt Romney.